are? Who decides? Is it the president himself? Is it Congress? Is it the judiciary? Is it all the above? None of the above? A, B, C, D, right? Which one is it? And I'm not making that a multiple choice question. There's no answer to that question, right? I think a couple of you said precedents, not to confuse with presidents. Precedents, right? Decisions of courts. Some people look what past presidents have done. And what you find, and Justice Jackson makes this point in his opinion in Youngstown, is that there's not many good resources. There's not many good things to cite to determine what are the powers of the presidents. So we have two cases today, one 20th century case and one really new case from about 6 months ago. First time I'm teaching it. Here we go. See how it goes. The first case you probably maybe never heard of. Maybe you don't care about steel mills in Ohio in the 1950s. You probably don't. Second case, unless you're living under a rock, you've heard about it. And I'm sure you all have strong thoughts on this case one way or the other. Maybe you don't. Good for you. But maybe you do have strong thoughts. And let's try to see how these cases sort of line up. Someone yelled at me last week because I didn't teach in the right order. This sequencing makes more sense. Because you see that John Roberts, John Roberts has judicial crushes. You know who he has a crush on? John Marshall. And who he has a crush on? Robert Jackson. So let me blow your minds. If you already know this, just pretend to blow your mind again. Okay. So remember I told you that Justice O'Connor and Chief Justice Rehnquist were dating in law school? Remember I told you this? Remember I told you that Rehnquist proposed to Justice O'Connor while he was clerking on Supreme Court stationery, right? Do you know who Rehnquist's boss was that year? Justice Jackson. Yeah. And you want to know something? Rehnquist did not like his Youngstown opinion. And Rehnquist actually wrote memos critical of the Youngstown opinion. He criticized it later in life. Okay. Fast forward to 1981. That's Chief Justice Rehnquist. You don't recognize this young pup? With those blue eyes, with those steely blue eyes. It's John Roberts.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be so different.
Look at pictures of me when I was a kid. All of you, trust me, not up to all of you, you all get old, I promise. Unless you don't get old, in which case it's bad. You will all age. So in 1981, John Roberts was clerking for Chief Justice Rehnquist. And that year, the court decided a case called Dames and Moore v. Regan. I haven't assigned it. It's in the book. Probably won't be in the book next edition. This case involves an attempt by the president to basically seize bank accounts. It arose in the aftermath of the Iranian hostage crisis, where the president has the power to seize bank accounts. And in many regards, Rehnquist pushed away from Youngstown. He didn't really follow the Youngstown framework. He kind of did, but didn't. And who was his clerk then again? It was John Roberts. And fast forward to 2024. Now Roberts himself is the Chief Justice. And yet he brings Robert Jackson back in the fold. So you have that lineage from Jackson to Rehnquist to Roberts, spanning almost 90 years, or 80-something years. I find it absolutely 70 years, I can't count. I find it absolutely fascinating. No one else cares. All right. Mine's not blown. All right, fine. What am I up to? All right. You want to give me the facts in Youngstown, please?
So late 1951, steel companies and employees were arguing about wages.
Yeah.
And the U.S. had recently become involved in the Korean War because they joined the United Nations.
Hold on, I'll come back in a second. What's the United Nations? Anyone know or care? So after World War I, there was an attempt to build like an international body that could adjudicate disputes between countries. It was called the League of Nations. Remember this one from AP government, right? It didn't work out. There was no sort of enforcement mechanism. It fell apart. After World War II, they tried again, and they built an institution called the United Nations. This group of all the countries come together to prevent war. The United States, the Soviet Union, China, England. Who's the other one? Which one? France, yeah. There are 5 countries that basically have a permanent vote to veto anything. But other than that, it's basically the Star Wars Galactic Empire. All the countries come together and think they have equal powers, whatever. But the United Nations the United States entered into this group, and they more or less decided that there was a problem in Korea. Okay. Now, Korea never invaded the United States. It wasn't like a Pearl Harbor situation. The situation in Korea involved sort of this proxy war between the North and the South. The North Koreans were backed by the Soviet Unions, and they wanted to promote communism and have basically a socialist state on the Korean Peninsula. The United States backed the South, which was a not communist government. And over the course of many years, the Soviets and the Americans basically waged this proxy war over Korea, a land very far away. Congress never declared war, but President Truman basically relied on authority from the United Nations and their actions. It's questionable whether this was even a legal war, but that's not important here. Many Americans went there and died. It was a tragic war. In fact, it's technically not even a war because it wasn't declared. It's called the Korean conflict. I'll call it the Forgotten War. All right, but this was a very big deal. It's only a couple years after World War II finished. We're already back fighting another war. What was happening in the home front? Labor unrest. There was labor unrest. Steel workers were threatening to go on strike. And what would have happened if the steel workers went on strike? Well, we wouldn't have enough steel. Of course, I mean, they could avoid the strike by perhaps agreeing to terms, but sometimes you can't do that, right? So the government had been involved with many efforts to avoid a strike. For example, they have these mediators and people negotiate and so on. But it got to the point where the government realized, okay, these workers are going to walk off the job. If they walk off the job, this will impact our war effort. How? We won't have enough steel for our tanks and our planes and our munitions and so on. Everything has steel in it. And you may not know, anyone ever work in a steel mill? Anyone ever see one? These furnaces are hot. And they're very hard to shut down and very hard to restart. So even if the people went on strike, it would become a very significant time to actually resume operation. Not like, okay, you go off the clock, you come back, on the clock the next day, right? It would take significant time to restart the furnace and get everything started. If you want to see Avengers Endgame, right? It takes a while to get things hot. This was a problem. Now, Dalen, had Congress considered the issue of what to happen in case of a strike at a steel mill?
No, but the President Truman did write them a letter saying what he had done. They did not respond. So.
Yeah. Well, let's go perhaps a step backwards, right? Before the current conflict arose, Dalen, had Congress considered the issue of what to happen in case of a strike?
I think so, yes.
Yeah? Trent? Yeah?
That's the Taft-Hartley Act?
Yeah, so tell me about that, please.
So it was basically an unadopted congressional act about seizing labor, basically settling labor disputes.
You said unadopted. What do you mean unadopted? Is it an orphan?
It was unauthorized and the amendment was rejected.
So Congress didn't pass the bill is what you're saying. Okay, so a situation where Congress considered granting the authority to seize the mills, but then Congress did not grant. Am I correct in that one? Okay, so Trent is correct, okay? The issue of what to happen in case of a steel mill didn't sort of pop up out of nowhere, right? It wasn't like there was a surprise strike, right? They consider this. But Congress affirmatively rejected this sort of bill. Congress rejected it, said we don't want to give the president this power, right? Why? Everyone's not there. I'm sorry, what's your name again? Yeah. Why do you think Congress didn't give the president the power to seize the steel mills? Just take a guess.
They didn't think he had the authority to do that?
Well, Congress could have given it to him. That's my question. My question is different. If Congress passed a statute saying, President, you can seize the steel mills, that's kosher, right? That's fine. Why do you think Congress did not give him that power?
That was Congress's power?
Sure, but why do you think Congress didn't want to surrender their power? You're right, it's Congress's power.
Too much power for the president?
Yeah, and who do you think would be affected by the seizure of steel mills? Well, yeah, everyone, but most directly, who's affected by it?
The workers?
The workers, yeah. Where do you think they work?
Sorry, what?
Who do the members of Congress represent?
The people?
Yeah, and what do those people do? Where do they work?
Students?
Sure, yes. Just keep in mind, when we say they seize the steel mills, you know what that means? It means you can't walk off the job. What happens? You walk off the job? Handcuffs. You get your ass arrested. Oh, sorry. You get arrested. Sorry, it's been a long day. You get arrested. And if you're a manager who's at the steel mill and you want to lock out your workers and you try to put a padlock on the door, you're getting yourself arrested. God, I should apologize. There was a judge last week in D.C. who actually said WTF on the bench. We are beyond the looking glass. We are through the looking glass. She actually, oh God, this was a bad case. There was a case involving transgender military stuff, and she actually asked a lawyer, what do you think Jesus would think about this order? She's like, WTF. Federal judge. Federal judge. Anyway, what event's happening today at 1 o'clock? Terrible plug. That wasn't intentional. Yeah, there's an event at 1 o'clock today. You should come down. Ryan Nelson and Rachel Marson doing a discussion on transgender issues. You should definitely come. Okay. Oh, Evelyn, you're back. Okay, so let me come to you then. So what do we make of the fact that Congress considered giving the president the power to seize the steel mills? They thought about it, and he did not give the president this power. How should we sort of understand that sort of history? Why is that relevant to the question in Youngstown?
Well, because since they had considered doing it, but then they didn't, and he shouldn't have been able to try and seize it if how he's not given him that power.
Yeah. Does the fact that the president asked for it and didn't get it, does that just suggest he has that power or not? In other words, do you ask for something you already have?
No.
She's right. Maybe she's wrong, but I think she's right. The fact that Truman asked for it and then didn't get it suggests that he didn't already have that authority. Okay? All right. So anyway, the strike happens. The owner of the steel mill, it's the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company in Youngstown, Ohio, ran to a federal judge. I think they went to his house even. It was they basically I have a picture over here. Yeah, that's the Youngstown Sheet and Tube. I actually went to Youngstown, Ohio once just for fun because I wanted to see where this thing was, and this is what I do with my life. I was really out of my way too. I was going to oh God, that's right. I had a clerkship interview in Akron, Ohio, and I did like an hour detour just to go to Youngstown. Maybe I should be prepared when I've gotten the job, but this is my priorities are not your priorities. But this is where it was, Youngstown, Ohio. And the owner of the mill went to the The owner of the mill went to a federal judge in D.C. And the federal judge in D.C. entered an injunction saying, President Truman, you do not have the power to seize the mill. I just want to pause for you a minute. When a judge issues an injunction, you must surrender the mills, give it back to the owners. Sabina, can you say no to a judge? Ooh. He's nodding yes. I'll come to him in a second. I'm asking you, though. Can you tell a judge, go pound sand? Not going to do it?
No, I mean, you can appeal, but...
Oh, okay. You can appeal, but I'm telling you, the judge issues an order saying surrender the mill immediately. You file an appeal. I mean, even if the smartest lawyers in the world work super fast. There were no computers back then. It might take a day or so to write the appeal, doesn't it? What about in those hours between when you get the order from the judge and you get your appeal papers filed with the court?
Well, you can't surrender.
Yeah, but if you give the mill back to the workers, it takes time to start the furnace, this all stuff. Is it possible to comply with the order immediately and then take everything back? Like say, all right, everyone back on the job. Just kidding, go away. Can you do that? Do you always have to follow court orders? Michael, you're shaking your head no, my friend. Very no. You're shaking it strong, solid no.
Yeah, I mean, what's the judge going to do? He can't really stop you. He's just writing on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh
You
boy.
should listen to him, but who cares? You don't really have to.
Whoa. Who cares what these judges think? WTF, right? So I said, whoa. All right, we got here earlier than I thought. Okay, good. So there's a dilemma, right? We often think of judiciary doesn't have the power of the sword or the power of the purse, as Hamilton told us, has the power of just judgment and will. And we said this before, that the courts depend on the executive branch enforcing the law. You send the marshal to go arrest you, right? You go send someone to come put you into custody. Judge is not getting off the bench putting handcuffs on you, right? During the Civil War, Chief Justice Taney did not go and say to the prisoner, all right, I'm going to take you out of here. He sent his poor deputy to the fort. It's like, hey, can you please bring the prisoner? And they're like, no, not going to do it. So at least for some period of time in this case, there was an injunction against the government. The government just didn't follow it. Now, in fairness, I think the government was promptly filing an appeal. They filed an appeal right away. And in my view, at least, I think maybe people disagree, if a judge issues basically a nationwide injunction against the federal government and doesn't put that ruling on hold, the government can take time to file a timely appeal. That's not a crisis. That I think a lot of these judges in the 1940s and today need to realize that they're not the final word, and at least allow an appeal to be filed in a timely fashion. That might be unpopular, but I think in this case, he basically ignored them. So the government filed an appeal to the D.C. Circuit, and the very next day, I think it was a 5-4 vote, if my memory serves, the court granted basically a pause, saying, okay, we're going to put the lower court ruling on hold so you can go to the Supreme Court, right? What if the 5-4 went the other way? Again, what if before you get to the Supreme Court, all the lower court judges say, sorry, you got to relinquish the mills? Once they relinquish control of the mills, it's over, right? They're not getting it back. So again, curious what the powers of lower court judges. So the case goes to the Supreme Court, and the timeline of this case was sort of insane. Right? I mean, within the span of like a month, the entire thing was. That's what it used to look like, by the way. You look at, yeah, that's Josh before John Roberts, and John Roberts before Josh. Only slightly exaggerating. So the case goes to the court, cited super duper duper quickly. And when the court moves quickly, they do their worst work. This is a fact. By the way, this Trump immunity case was done like 2 months. When the court moves quickly, they do not work well. They issue opinions that are fragmented. Their decisions aren't always lining up. There's all these concurrences going this way and that way. Right? But sometimes the court has to move quickly. There's sort of no way around it. Right? The court can say, okay, let's hear this case in 6 months, and maybe in June we'll write an opinion. That wasn't going to work. There was a war that was brewing. I'll give you another case called Ex parte Quirin. Quirin. Ex parte Quirin. This is a crazy case. You had I'm serious, a bunch of Nazis who washed up on the beach of Long Island during World War II. And they came here as spies, as saboteurs. So by the way, were people trying to sabotage the United States during the war? You bet they were. These guys were Germans. But the weird part was that they came here like, wait a minute, we surrender. We don't want to be Nazis, we want to surrender to the Americans. We'd rather be American prisoners than Nazi soldiers. They actually walked to an FBI office and they said, we are German spies, we surrender. And they didn't believe them. And then eventually I think they went to Washington, D.C. and they tried to surrender. But what they didn't expect was to be charged with treason and sabotage. And they had actually a case where they were tried not before a court, but before a military tribunal, which is basically an office in the DOJ. I think it's where the SG's office is now. They basically was tried by a bunch of lawyers in the government building. They filed an appeal to the Supreme Court, and Roosevelt said, we don't care. We're going to execute these guys next week. So Supreme Court, you do you, right? Whatever you want to do, we're executing them. So after the case was heard, these guys were executed. The court hadn't issued a decision yet. The decision came after these guys were room temperature. So you want to talk about judicial crises? I can write a book about it. Right? Okay. So at least here, though, they had to move quickly. Right? They knew that this mill was going to stay in government possession. So the actual case itself split 6-3. Oh, there's a nice picture. I like that one. 6-3. 6 votes that Truman must surrender the mill, and then 3 votes the other way. By the way, almost everyone in the majority was a Roosevelt appointee, and I think all the dissenters were Truman appointees. Maybe off by 1 or 2, but it sort of broke down that way. Alrighty then, let's talk about Laura. Let's go first with to Justice Black's majority opinion, Hugo Black. Hugo Black was, by the way, a fascinating guy. I love talking about these characters. Hugo Black was a senator from Alabama, ardent Democrat, member of the Ku Klux Klan. You don't know that? But the irony is that he became one of the biggest champions for civil rights. Again, he said he was only a member of the Klan they elected, and it's not entirely false. If you wanted to be an Alabama politician, you sort of had to be a member of the Klan. I'm not justifying it. That's what happened. But he later became a serious supporter of civil rights. Probably the biggest civil libertarian in the court in the 20s, at least in the 1950s and 60s. Justice Frankfurter was a law professor. You should never put a law professor in the Supreme Court. Terrible idea. He would give. When the justices were in conference, they would always talk about the cases, and the story was he would talk for 40 minutes straight because that's how long a class was for him. Like he would basically give a lecture in the conference. He had a lot of friction. And the irony is he was a very influential academic, but when he got to the court, he was non-influential. There are not many Frankfurter opinions in this book, in fact. And Frankfurter became what we would today call a model of judicial restraint. That is, the court should not step out of line. The court should be very restrained in how they act. And that was almost the opposite of what the Roosevelt appointees would do. Justice William O. Douglas, he's a character. He was appointed to the court very young. I think he has the longest tenure in Supreme Court history. Thomas will break it soon enough. But I think Douglas has basically the longest tenure. He was appointed to the court in his late 30s, early 40s. Bit of a ladies' man. Had many wives. He would often leave his wife for a secretary, and the secretary for a wife, and then leave that secretary for another secretary. It happened a couple of times. Ladies' man, I suppose we call it today. Very liberal. He hated Frankfurter. They fought a lot. So even though they were both Roosevelt appointees, they had a lot of conflict. Justice Jackson's a remarkable human being. I don't say that lightly. I won't say that about Frankfurter, Douglas. They were whatever. Jackson was remarkable. He never graduated from law school. He went to the Albany Law School for a year or two, never finished. He was an apprentice. Became very well connected with then Governor Roosevelt in New York. He became Roosevelt's Solicitor General, and then Roosevelt's Attorney General. And then the Supreme Court said, we're so sad to lose you as our lawyer. And then he became a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. He advised Roosevelt in World War II on all the policy with Japan and Germany, before the war. He knew how things worked. So when he dissented in Korematsu, it was a big deal, right? He had worked for Roosevelt, and he told Roosevelt, no way, not going to let this happen. After the war finished, he was sent to Nuremberg to basically prosecute the Nazis in the war trials. Remarkable human being. Now, his tenure was cut short. He died of a heart attack in his 50s. He died of a heart attack, and his body was found in the apartment of his secretary. I'm pretty sure I'm right on this one. There's speculation. Back then they kept this up hush-hush. But as best as I can tell, he died of a heart attack in the apartment of his secretary. Take for that what you will. Sensing a pattern, right? Again, things were different. It was the 50s. Things were different back then. Justice Burton, not much to say about him. Justice Tom Clark, again, from Texas. He's the only justice from Texas, memory serves. He went to UT. In fact, I think the law library at UT is called the Clark Law Library. Someone can Google that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right about that.
I think it's Tarleton.
No, but there's a Clark. There's a Clark. I know it's the Tarleton Library, but there's Clark something. There's something named after Clark. Anyway, he's from Texas. His son became, it's a funny story, his son became Attorney General. Why? LBJ, another Texan, wanted to create a vacancy in the Supreme Court. So what did he do? He appointed Tom Clark's son as Attorney General, forcing the justice to retire, and creating a vacancy. LBJ, this is brilliant. He told Justice Goldberg, I want to make you the ambassador to the United Nations that can solve Vietnam. Resign. Give me your seat. And he resigned. He got the seat appointed to the Supreme Court. Genius. Okay. Chief Justice Vincent did not serve very long. He also had a heart attack, not in his secretary's office, but he died very abruptly, unexpectedly. He was replaced by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Brown v. Board was actually argued for the first time under Vincent. At the time, there was no majority opinion. When Warren came to office, he re-argued the case. He got a 9-0 decision out of it. Warren was very good at building coalitions. He was, as a governor, he was very good. Justice Reed, not much to say. Sherman Minton, not much to say. Not very influential. There's a bridge named after him in Kentucky that was crossed very often. Okay. You know the big guys are, right? Black, important. Frankfurt, important. Douglas, Jackson, important. The other ones, trifling. Right. Justice Gorsuch tells a story, and if you ever go to the Supreme Court, there are portraits of all the justices lining the walls, right? And he would always go there when he was clerking with Justice White, his boss, and White would say, "How many of these faces can you name?" And Gorsuch was like, "I don't even know." He's like, "That's the point." And he's like, "In a few years, people will know who I am." Who's ever heard of Justice White? Anyone?
The school named the student lounge after Justice Clark.
Okay, I knew something was named after him. Okay, that's actually kind of pathetic. That's actually really sad. I know I've seen his name in the building.
They had some sort of athletic field named after him.
What?
It looked like they had some sort of athletic field named
That's good.
What was that?
He's heard of Atlanta.
Yeah, he's a stream of commerce guy.
Yeah.
Clark? Oh, Justice Clark. Yes, he Katzenbach. Yeah, I guess. It's not a. That's only Clark. There was not much of a jurisprudential impact. I mean, you talk about the giants, right? Black, Frankfurter, Douglas, Jackson. Those were big deals. Clark and Burton and Minton. Yeah, forgettable. But anyway, so Gorsuch would say, how many of these can you actually name? And most of them you can't even name. The 100 and something Supreme Court justices, most of them, you don't know who they are. There's actually an article, The Most Insignificant Justice. Was it Gabriel Duval? I think there's an article on this. But anyway, there's some pretty... He served for almost 30 years, too, just had really no important opinions written. It's sad. I think it's Duval. I might be wrong on that. But
What year? What were the years?
in the early 19th century, I don't remember the exact, but just living in the shadows of John Marshall and Joseph Story and others and Roger Taney, just no one remembers. I mean, even now in the current court, I mean, honestly, who will be the current court in 20 years? Thomas, maybe. The other ones are pretty forgettable. I'm serious. I edit a case book, and I think which opinions will actually be taught in 25, 30 years. Justice Kennedy was really important for a long time. Why? He was a fifth vote. He's gone. His opinions are falling out of my book. They just don't matter anymore. I mean, why do we still read Holmes and Story and Marshall and Jackson? Because they write words that endure beyond their times. The current opinions are written, let's decide this case about this person. We'll just deal with this, nothing else. Okay, great. Right? The Trump immunity case might be one because, the ruling for the ages, but most of the opinions in this court are just kind of situational. They're just signing whatever's before them. I'll be here teaching it. But no, I mean, you got to take the long view because a lot of these opinions just aren't that significant. I mean, okay, Roe, you Dobbs, okay, well, what are we going to do? That's it. There's nothing. That's it. It decided this issue. It doesn't actually speak beyond it. Yeah, Thomas is the only one that actually might have an impact in 30 years of the stuff he's written, but that's about it. Of course, it has some also far-looking stuff, but the other ones, yeah, sorry. Okay. Let's go back. All right, so Justice Black was a textualist. What do I mean by a textualist? He believed that the Constitution should be read, I mean this literally, that we should follow the text in a literal fashion. No one today actually agrees with this. This is not what textualists believe today. That's what Black believes. So, for example, the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. No law. No law meant no law, period. He basically said any restriction on speech is unconstitutional. He believed that firmly. He dissented in almost every free speech case. What's remarkable, I think I told you this, is that there's quite a lot of cases about obscenity, right? Pornography, protected by the Constitution. Obscenity is not. And what is obscenity? Well, one justice said you don't when you see it, right? Not a very useful test, but he meant it. Because actually in a movie theater, they would actually watch the stuff in the theater. The justice would sit there in a movie theater watching pornography to see if it's obscene or not. Lord help us, right? That's what the Constitution meant in the 60s. But Justice Black refused to watch the movies. Good for him. But also because it doesn't matter what's in there, I'm going to say it's protected by the Constitution. But here, Justice Black had an expressly textualist opinion, right? There were three possible clauses that might support, I like the little bubbles, I like this one. There are three clauses that might support Truman's power to seize the mill. So we can start with the Article of Vesting Clause. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. Shall be vested. Right? We don't know what those powers are. What are the executive power? Notice it's not powers, plural. It's power, singular, as if like this body of power. Like I've got the power. He-Man, right? The power is your right. What is the He-Man is? No? Master of the Universe? What is the executive power? Right? Where does it come from? Another clause is the Commander-in-Chief clause. The President is Commander-in-Chief of the Army. But does that mean the domestic stuff, or is that the Army overseas? Right? Where is this Army? And then you have the Take Care clause. The President shall take care of the laws and faithfully executed. What are the laws? Who passes the laws? Not the President, it's Congress. And what Justice Black says is each of these powers does not work. Right? There is no statute giving the President this power. Congress rejected that. That's the Taft-Hartley one that Trent mentioned a minute ago, right? They rejected this power. So the majority says, by Justice Black, there is no enumerated, there's no textual basis for this authority, therefore the President loses. All right, any questions? The Black one I think is probably the easiest of the opinions to understand. Anyone have questions on the Black opinion? Okay. Next up is Justice Frankfurter. And this is actually one of Frankfurter's more important decisions. It actually gets cited quite a bit. John Roberts loves citing Frankfurter in Youngstown. He actually really he cites one a little bit too often for my taste, but he cites it very often. And Justice Frankfurter, oh, I love this effect. This is my favorite effect. Let me just play it for you. I love some of the scenes. This is my favorite scene in the entire series. I gotta turn the sound back on. Yeah, these videos took me years to make. Years.
150-year-long tradition.
Sorry, 1 second. Oops, sorry, 1 second. Glitching.
For example, imagine if there was a 150-year-long tradition of presidents seizing private property. What if President Washington had seized private property and Congress did not object? And President Adams did the same. So did Presidents Jefferson and Madison, and every other president leading up to President Truman's still seizure in 1952. Justice Frankfurt explained that such a systematic.
All right, so let's just focus on this for a bit, right? We don't have many good resources to decide what executive power is, but perhaps one measure is by looking at what past presidents have done. So, Karen, I'll come to you. If President Washington did something, Karen, and no one objected, what sort of lesson do we take from that? Karen, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Karen.
Can you repeat your question again?
If President Washington did something and people didn't object, Congress didn't try to impeach him or anything, what lesson do we take from that?
What can be done and what can't be done in the future, possibly.
But again, if President Washington did something and Congress didn't object, does that suggest the President has the power or doesn't have the power?
It doesn't really say anything. It's just kind of left open in a way.
All right. So, Brett, let's say that then President Adams and President Madison and Jefferson and all the other presidents sort of do the same thing, and Congress never stops them. What do we take from that?
So I think what he said is like a gloss on the executive.
Gloss?
Yeah.
What? Like lip gloss? Well, what does gloss mean?
I took it as, like Washington could do it, and then Lincoln could do it, and then someone.
What's a gloss, though? What's this gloss?
Just down the line.
Like lip gloss.
Yeah, I guess. No, not lip gloss. But.
Ryan, want to take a stab? Your brush, maybe?
Just a supplement, or almost like a commentary in a way.
Commentary? I don't know what you mean a commentary.
I guess a supplement is a better word.
Supplement?
Addition.
Like a horn book? I'm not sure you mean a supplement. Alexandra?
So I took it to mean that it more so adds context for future presidents can use.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by context? That's an interesting word you used.
So based on presidents' past actions going forward, future presidents might say, well, because there's a history of past presidents being able to take this action, so can I.
I think we're getting close. Yeah, I think that's good. So there's this concept of gloss, and I keep saying lip gloss. I'm actually not being sort of sarcastic. The Constitution is what it is, right? It was written 200 years ago. It's under glass in the National Archives. We can't change the Constitution without an amendment. But it's said that presidents can add a gloss. Imagine a layer. How about a lacquer, right? Veneer, right? If you have an old piece of wood, you put a little lacquer on it, right? It gets a little shiny and pretty, right? Gloss, right? Shiny. That when the presidents take actions, there's a long practice, right? A continuous, unbroken, systematic practice. And Congress doesn't question it. Right? It's not like the president starts painting the Constitution. Oh, Congress says, stop, stop, stop. When the president does it over a long period of time, and the executive, the other branches don't sort of stop it, it's as if you put a veneer, a gloss, a cover, a coating, if you will, on the Constitution. You're not changing the Constitution, you're sort of adding to it. You're supplementing it. I actually like that word. I think that you are on the right track. Can that be right? Have you done adverse possession yet? No, you didn't. You just told me. If I'm a squatter and I squat in someone's property for 10 years and they know I'm there, they don't kick me out, guess what? I own it. I got fee simple. Josh, that's theft. You're stealing it. That's adverse possession. A long, uninterrupted practice pursued to the other part, and they don't object to it. That means you have to keep doing it. Justice Scalia describes this theory as basically adverse possession, squatting for the Constitution. You can't change the Constitution, but you can sort of gloss it, if you will.
How does that work with the? Isn't there a canon that says, like, maybe it's not a canon?
It is.
Says, the one that says if like congressional silence doesn't mean, or maybe it's just a quote from a case.
It is, right. So there's a principle that we can't draw much from congressional silence. In other words, the failure of Congress to enact a statute is not a way to judge its meaning. This is the exact opposite. This is looking to congressional inaction as itself a justification for power. You're right, Addie. It's the inverse. This is why this is sort of a, I won't say controversial, but people don't agree with this theory. That in other words, if presidents keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and Congress is like, ooh, I don't know, I'm going to just take a step back and take a step back, then the president's now taken over the power. They've surrendered. The better example is the president says, I'm going to do this, and Congress is like, you go. I agree. I'm going to fund it. That is different than the Congress like, okay, never mind, I'm going to take a step back, go, right? The relationship between Congress and the president is tricky here. But that's the Frankfurter one. But in this case, there was no past precedent of seizing private property. This unbroken practice simply did not exist. So past practice, according to Frankfurter, does not help the Truman administration here. Everyone get Justice Frankfurter? By the way, his students called the hot dogs. He was at Harvard. All these students he put in the New Deal, they called the hot dogs. He was Frankfurter. You're welcome.
Why? Oh,
Frankfurter. Frankfurter's a hot dog. You know that?
Oh.
You know what Frankfurter? Frank? It's called a Frankfurter.
I never knew that.
Yes, he was a German Jew. It's true. All right, Anna, go ahead.
Can the power or the relationship between the powers of the president and Congress not be likened to the relationship between Congress and the states?
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, it said, I can't remember the exact case, but it's like they can have concurrent powers. So
Gibbons.
Yes.
Yes.
So can the president and the Congress also not have concurrent
Well,
powers?
let me look at it like this. Let's say that Congress passed all these laws that intrude upon the state's authorities, and the states don't push back. Does that itself put a gloss on federalism? That the states lose those powers?
I mean, I would think so.
Right. I mean, this is the long history of American power. When one branch exercises power and the other fails to push back or indeed gives in, that reallocates how the power is structured. So the trend over the last 200 years has been more power in the federal government, less power in the states, and more power in the executive, less power in Congress. I mean, all the sort of contemporary debates about executive power didn't start in 2025. It started a long time ago. The creep towards the executive has been happening for a very long time. Congress has not asserted itself in sometimes. I mean, we have to say it's basically the byproduct of decades upon decades of not doing your, not actually exercising your legislative power. Oscar?
Back to Aim's point, in like some ways they do have concurrent powers, right? Because the president has the right to like hold somebody without trial, but then Congress.
Well, I didn't say that. I mean, the Supreme Court, or at least one justice, has said that the president can't do that. You have to have the Congress suspend habeas corpus. Should I get?
Recent past precedent.
Which recent precedent are you talking about?
Joe Biden, right? He was on a bunch of January 6ers without trial.
No, they had trials. They were all sentenced and convicted.
Long pre-trial detentions.
Yeah, I mean, bail. When judges deny bail, that means you're giving the process. All right. What else? All right, that is Justice Frankfurter. You ever know Frankfurter's a hot dog?
No.
Really? Yeah, in fact, during World War II, they changed name of stuff. Like they called, instead of sauerkraut, they called it Liberty Cabbage, because they don't have German names.
American hamburger.
Well, yeah, I mean, anyone remember during the Iraq War, they called them freedom fries instead of French fries because they were trying to boycott France? Freedom fries? No one remember that? Jacques Chirac? You guys remember? You guys weren't alive then. This was fine. So someone. Okay. All right. So let's go into Justice Douglas. So Justice Douglas, again, wrote what I call a structural opinion. What do you mean by structural? Structure refers to how the powers in the Constitution are allocated. And he says, look, can Congress seize private property? Sure they can. How do you know that? The Takings Clause, right? We'll do this later this semester. No, you won't. We'll do this in property, I guess. The Fifth Amendment says that private property can be taken with just compensation, right? If the government wants to take your property, they have to pay you for it. Which branch of government can pay you for taking your property? Which branch of government has the power of the purse? The legislature. So Justice Douglas says the only branch of government that can seize property is the branch that can pay you for it. And the president doesn't have the power to seize your property. That belongs to Congress. Therefore, Congress has its power. Makes sense to me. In other words, when Truman seized the mills, did he pay the steel mills? I don't think so. Generally, when you seize property, you have to pay them for it. Okay. That is Justice Douglas. Then we get to Justice Jackson, which is arguably the most important sort of, this is my favorite chart in the entire book. We get to Justice Jackson, arguably one of the most important concurrences in American history. Right? Justice Jackson was not a textualist. He didn't think the text of the Constitution helped very much. He also was not much of an originalist. He didn't really care what happened in the times of George Washington. He wasn't even a structuralist. He didn't even care how different parts of the Constitution worked together. He was what you might call a pragmatist. He was saying, let's be real here. Let's just sort of look at what's going on. And he sketched out these three zones, or three tiers. Think of like a cake, like tiers. How many tiers there are? 3 zones or 3 tiers of presidential action. And he said, we as judges only have to decide one issue, right? What has Congress said about this, and what has the executive said about this? And depending where that falls, we have to look at the case a little bit differently. So let's start with the first zone, zone 1, if you will. Right? Zone 1 is where the president has max power. So the Simpsons, max power. He has maximum authority. Right? Maximum authority. And why does the president have the maximum authority? Because he's relying on 2 sources of power. His own power, that's the Article 2 powers in the Constitution, and the powers granted by Congress. In other words, Congress says, we are giving you this power, and you have your own powers, this is the max. This is like the apex, the top of the pyramid. And so what happens when the president has this maximum power? The court reviews the action with deference. What do I mean by deference? The court is it's the opposite of skeptical, right? Think of like, are you looking at this with a microscope or magnifying lens, or just looking with your bare eyes? They're looking just on its face with their bare eyes, not looking at it very closely. They apply what's often called the strongest presumption of constitutionality. What does it mean, a presumption of constitutionality? The court presumes that this is legal. The court presumes that this is legal. They presume that's constitutional. Right? They're not going to be in the business. Right? They're not going to be in the business of second guessing the government. Why? If Congress thinks it's okay and the president thinks it's okay, then that's good enough for me. The judges won't step in. Everybody can get the first tier. That's the easiest one. And by the way, not to jump it too far, but in Trump against the United States, when the president acts with his core powers, Congress can't regulate him. Where does that one fall? That fall number 1, number 2, number 3. You want to take a stab?
What was the question?
Where the Congress is exercising core powers, the president's exercising his core powers, and the Congress tries to stop him. That fall in 1, 2, or 3? You're right. So sort of the reason why Jackson and Rehnquist and Roberts don't always line up. Jackson's focused on number 1, right? That's like the ideal. Then he describes this third zone, this third tier. And here, Congress has not given the president powers. In fact, Congress may have said, President, you cannot do this. You can't do this, Mr. President. And the president says, watch me. Watch me. Because you know why? I got the power. I got the Article 2, right? I got the Article 2 powers, and I can do this no matter what Congress says. These are my core powers. So what does Justice Jackson say about this third tier? They must scrutinize with caution. Scrutiny, right? That's what we're using. This is like in Korematsu, right? You scrutinize with caution. Jackson says, the authorities at its lowest ebb. Think of like when the water goes out to sea, the water gets very shallow, right? The lowest ebb of when the tide goes out. It's not high tide, it's low tide. The power is at its lowest ebb. All right? How does number 3 line up with Chief Justice Roberts in Youngstown? The court was basically saying when the president has core powers, number 3, you get absolute immunity. You can see why Justice Sotomayor is so upset. Because he's like, Youngstown, didn't we say that when the president says he's a power and Congress says you don't, you go to number 3? This is what I'm telling you. The Jackson opinion has not been the law for a long time. People think it's great, but it hasn't sort of represented where the court's at. The court has been trending towards a much stronger, robust view of Article 2. You have a unitary executive. There's one executive with all this power. And that's been at the expense of Congress. So if we get number 1, number 3. Number 2 is one people always have, Josh, I don't get number 2. Yeah, neither do I. Right? You're not alone. I've done this now for I don't know how many years, but it's been a long time. And then Jackson, his name is Robert Jackson. Justice Jackson says, then there's this place in the middle, zone number 2, where it's not really clear what the president's powers are. And it's not really clear what the Congress's view on this is. He calls it a zone of twilight. You remember the Twilight Zone, the shows? If you're Rod Serling, oh, great show. Lousy movie, but great show. Go right to the William Shatner, Something on the Plane, right? You ever see this one? Yeah, classic. Oh, God. To Serve Man. You ever see that one? It was a cookbook. the premise, they got this alien book that comes down, and they figure it's called To Serve Man. They go, they're trying to help us, right? It was a cookbook. They're trying to fatten us up to eat us. Anyway, that's so good. Monsters Coming to Maple Street. It's parable of the Cold War. Oh, go watch a trial. This one. It's on YouTube. Anyway, so what's twilight? Twilight is like, the sun is setting. Not sure if it's day. You're not sure if it's night. You can't really tell what's going on. In this case, we don't really know what kind of scrutiny to apply. Jackson's saying, but you know what? This is not such a case because in this case, it's pretty easy. I forgot where I am. Oh, you've been waiting, Taylor, so long, patiently. What standard, or which tier, which zone does Justice Jackson think this case falls into? The steel seizure case? 3. Why does Jackson place the steel seizure case number 3?
Because Congress did not authorize the president to seize the steel mills.
Yeah, this is easy. This is the Taft-Hartley point that Trent made a few minutes ago. Congress considered giving the president this power to take over the mills, and they declined to give it to it. So all the president has to rely on is his Article 2 powers. And Jackson thinks that this power does not cover seizing private property. Therefore, Jackson thinks this is unconstitutional. And he has these great lines. Again, Jackson was such a good writer. The reason why we read his opinions, he's such a good writer. There's one line I want to just get. Where's he writes, and by the way, he's writing this after World War II. He saw what happened to Nazi Germany. He saw what happened when the rule of law collapses. He knows what he's talking about here. And he says, with all of its defects, delays, and inconveniences, men have discovered no technique for preserving free government except that the executive be under the law, and the law be made by parliamentary deliberations. He's talking about Germany there, right? They had a government, and it collapsed. And he says, such institutions may be destined to pass away.